Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 31st of October of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Avdiivka, and we have a lot of very interesting details and updates, and probably the most important, the most interesting, and maybe the funniest story is the story about one Leopard of 47th Mechanized Brigade that arrived in Avdiivka direction recently. On this video we can see how the Ukrainians tried to complete a counter-offensive operation against the Russian positions along the railways, and they were trying to attack and to hit the Russian infantry who managed to dig in deeper along the railways, and as a result of counter-attack the Ukrainian Leopard was hit, damaged and later destroyed as a result of fire of Russian T-72 tank. Of course, it's not just the losses among the tanks, also this is reputational losses, because the Western Leopard was damaged and destroyed not even by T-90 but with regular and simple old Soviet T-72. So what about this Leopard and what's so funny about this situation? First of all, I'll remind you that yesterday we got a very interesting video that I added on the map softly. In this video we can see a brave Ukrainian soldier who was making a TikTok video and we can see the tank, Leopard tank, behind him. And basically this is the tank that the Russians managed to destroy one day later. So if we return back to this video, we're gonna see in the final phase the defense equipment on the sides of the tank, of the top of the tank. So that was the same Leopard that arrived in Avdiivka direction yesterday. So as we can see, the average life cycle time for Ukrainian armored vehicles in Avdiivka direction is around 1 day. As I understand, later and with more days of clashes, this average life cycle is going to get less and less. When talking about the entire situation about north of Avdiivka, the sources are saying, some Russian sources were saying that the Russians have already started the assault and storm operation inside the chemical plant, but other sources later told us that those were some kind of speculations from some Russian sources. So basically currently there are no offensive operation and there are no clearing or storming operation of the chemical plant. The Russians still try to establish control and to secure the area along the railways. And now the Russians control the railways. Let's say this, from the edge border of the Terikon to the north somewhere in this direction. So this is 100% control. Everything that located further to the north, and maybe the Russians control not the entire area, maybe 50-60%. I believe that there are very heavy clashes, and during the day the Russians try to improve their positions and they launch another offensive operation in direction of the tree lines and in direction of the railways. And this attack took place maybe not on the 31st but maybe on the 30th of October. And as a result of those clashes, the Russians managed to reach the tree line, the edge tree line, but they haven't managed to pass it, they haven't managed to cross. A lot of armored vehicles were destroyed on the minefields. Some of the armored vehicles were damaged as a result of tank missile strikes. Some of them were damaged and destroyed as a result of artillery fire and cluster rounds. And the most important thing, there are a few things that you need to note. First of all, if we go back, we see the direction of Russian fire. Take a look at this armored vehicle, and they were attacking to the south, not to the west, not to the east, not to the north, but to the south. And also the Russians managed to land infantry, and probably later the Russians managed to capture the tree line. So basically, if we will talk about this area, we can use the Russian tanks, some Russian tank for these purposes, and the Russians were moving along this arrow. They were moving in this area, and somewhere at this point the Russians were attacking to the south. So that was the direction of Russian tanks fire. So that means that maybe this territory, this tree line, is not under complete Russian control, or this area is in the gray zone. We will keep currently this map as is, but if we continue receiving the same updates, probably we will force to change the map. So that was the Russian attacks. Furthermore, another thing that we need to note is that the Russians were attacking this area, this tree line, without support of demining equipment. And if we take a look at Krasnohorivka, there is another icon in this area and this tree line, and the sources are saying that this is exactly the demining equipment that was abandoned tree line behind, and the main reason of that this demining equipment probably got on the minefields and was damaged or even destroyed. So this is a very big problem for the Russians, and this is something like a pattern or key feature or the tactics that Ukrainians use. There are very heavy clashes along the railways. There are very heavy clashes along Terikon. There are very heavy clashes in the south. But the Ukrainians have prioritized their targets and their goals and the most important things on the ground. And currently, the number one, the Russian target number one is demining equipment. And every time the Ukrainian intelligence managed to discover this or that demining equipment heading from one city to another somewhere in this area, the Ukrainians drop everything and correct and focus their attention just against this demining equipment with one purpose: to destroy this type of weapon and not to allow the Russians to demine this or that field. This is target number one for the Ukrainians. Very smart, by the way. The second target, target when talking about priorities, is TOS flamethrower systems. Every time the Ukrainians see the flamethrower system, they start attacking this type of weapon with everything they have. And of course, the main purpose of these attacks is not to allow the Russians to bring the flamethrower systems very close to the combat line, because we understand that flamethrower system, first of all, is heavy assault equipment. And if the Russians and take a look at Avdiivka. Just take a look at Avdiivka. Imagine yourself how many ammo depots under the surface, how many weapons, how many tanks, how many chemical things, how many fuel are stored in the chemical plant. And now imagine yourself a few packages of TOS flamethrowers arrives in Avdiivka chemical plant. I think that there are going to be maybe even a nuclear explosion or something like this in this area. And the Ukrainians understand this clearly. They understand that they can't allow the Russians to bring this type of weapon to the combat line, and they destroy it as soon as they see it. So this is the second goal. And then there may be less priority targets for the Ukrainians, like soldiers, like infantry, evacuation machines, maybe helicopters, and so on. So this is the Ukrainian tactics, and currently we see that the Ukrainians are stepping back, but not so fast probably as the Russians wanted. When talking about southern direction, we got just few geolocations, and the first one took place on the north of Vadian and Opytna, which confirms the Russian progress on the north in direction of Avdiivka. The Russian infantry stormtroopers were moving along this area, which confirms the Russian control of this territory. And the Russians also bombed and attacked the Ukrainian infantry on the eastern part of Pervomayska with FPV drone bombardments, and after later with artillery strikes and probably also with the TOS flamethrower systems. So the clashes are very heavy, but for example, for the previous 24 hours, we haven't received even a single geolocated video that confirms real Russian progress, like the entering of chemical plants or crossing the railways. So I believe that we're going to receive them very soon, but for now, nothing. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes on Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost 170 soldiers, 10 armored vehicles, including 3 tanks, and 9 artillery systems. The level of losses among the artillery systems is the heaviest since the creation of this front line. The Ukrainians managed to brought some artillery positions very close, trying to stop the Russians. And for example, we saw the video of Ukrainian artillery strikes. You see the level of concentration of Ukrainian artillery against the Russian positions. Of course, I can't imagine the Russian soldiers who take a decision to move along these fields, between the fields, under such a heavy fire of just regular rounds, and of course under the cluster rounds, under the attacks of multi-launch rocket systems like Grad, Uragan. So nothing can survive this. Nothing can survive, and the Russians understand they have some timings. They need to move. So now, during the 30th and 31st of October, the Russians mainly were focused to suppress the Ukrainian artillery that the Ukrainians brought very close to the combat line. As soon as the Russians were able to suppress, to establish artillery superiority, then they were going to make more steps against the Ukrainian forces and Ukrainian positions in Avdiivka direction. Now we're moving to my favorite direction, to South Donetsk area. We're going to talk about the cities like Krasnohorivka, Kurachovo, Vuhledar, Vadiana, Konstantinovka, Novomykhailivka. Today the Russian sources published the video from Krasnohorivka, how they were bombing and attacking the concentration of Ukrainian forces inside the city. This is say another stage, another step of offensive operation against Avdiivka, but this is not like the close, this is not like the very near positions. This is very far from Avdiivka, but this is also very important operation because the Ukrainians used Avdiivka and Krasnohorivka as the cities for concentration of their artillery forces to bomb and attack Donetsk. So by forcing the Ukrainians to step back from Avdiivka, the Russians will solve the problem maybe for 50%. Also, they need to force the Ukrainians to step back from Krasnohorivka, Konstantinovka, and Novomykhailivka. Also, don't forget that during the previous days, the Russians managed to improve their positions on the south of Krasnohorivka by establishing control over the tree lines and by improving their positions in the vicinity of coal mine. And also that attack against the Ukrainian concentration in Krasnohorivka was attacked to prevent any concentration of Ukrainian forces for further counter-offensive operation on the south of Krasnohorivka. Now we're moving to South Donetsk direction, and we got a lot of very interesting updates. And the most important one, but not the most, we got from Konstantinovka. The Russian published the video how they attacked the bridge that connects Konstantinovka with Marinka with a Ha-37 missile. On this video we see that the Russians managed to got. We don't know maybe whether the Russians were able to destroy or not, but this is not the first attack against this bridge. In October, if we increase the number of days since the beginning of the month, you're gonna see that the Russians attacked this bridge twice this month. The first attack took place on the 18th of October. On this video we can see how the Russians also got this area. This is two different videos, by the way. And on the second video that we received on the 31st of October, we see another video how the Russians attack the bridge. So we see how the Russians are concentrated in this area, and we understand that what the Russians are planning to do. And the main reason and the main goals and the main things that the Russians want to achieve is to cut the Ukrainian forces who are currently trying to control and to save their positions in Novomykhailivka from the mainland. Because Novomykhailivka is the first priority target for the Russians. They don't care about Konstantinovka, about Marinka, Krasnohorivka, Vuhledar. They understand that they can collapse the Ukrainians in Novomykhailivka. Obviously, they can collapse the entire South Donetsk front line and to strike and attack the Ukrainian forces in their back in Kurachovo, Velyka Novosilka direction. But let's talk about Novomykhailivka one more time, and we will start from the Ministry of Defense report. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes on this direction, on the South Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost 160 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system. Important thing that we need to discuss about Novomykhailivka. If you remember, yesterday I published the video of another Russian attack along the main road from the south to the north in direction of Novomykhailivka. On this video we can see the Russian tanks, Russian personal carriers with infantry were heading in direction of the city or village, or that's left from the village. At some point the Russian soldiers landed in this area and started taking their positions, and the Russian tanks turned in another direction and started moving along the fields. So the Russians were trying to demine this area, and we tried to geolocate this territory, and we have geolocated, but we missed one important geolocation from this video that I would like to discuss with you in this video. So let's take a look at this video one more time carefully. At one important moment we will stop the video. So this is it. So this is the most important episode of this video, and the thing that you need to pay attention to is the things and buildings or something on the bottom of this video. You see there are ruins, a wall or something that left from wall, some ruins on the south and so on. And we have geolocated this position, and basically as a result of yesterday's clashes, the Russians managed to clear the territory and to get as close as possible to one of the most important fortification area on the south of Novomykhailivka, to this area. So the Russians were moving along this tree line, then the Russians turned to the north and start moving further. So somewhere in this area the Russians turned back, they demined this territory, cleared this area from mines, and the Russians moved back. If we take a look at this video one more time, we're going to see another important thing, that one tank returned back, this one, the tank that was in the head of the convoy, who was trying to demine this area. But the second tank continued moving to the south. We don't know, maybe that second tank also turned back, but the most important thing is the distance and the area that the Russians managed to achieve. So basically the Russians were moving right in front of this area, and there were no counterfire. The Ukrainians didn't attack the Russians, the Ukrainians didn't bomb the Russians. So as I understand, we haven't received like geolocation about that, but according to that video, I understand that Ukrainians left this fortification further to the north, and basically this territory either in the gray zone or maybe even under Russian control. So we need more time for geolocations, but as I understand, we don't have geolocation of that, but I think that the Russians captured this stronghold, and I made my conclusions based on the videos we just discussed. Another interesting geolocation we got from the south of Novomykhailivka, this one that was published by the Ukrainian forces. On this video we can see how the Ukrainians were bombing and attacking the Russian infantry among the fields with FPV drones bombardments. On this video we see how there were a lot of bombs. We see a lot of Russian stormtroopers who was moving from the south to the north. So according to these geolocated videos, according to position of Russian forces, I understand that during the previous 2 days the Russians managed to develop their position significantly on the south of Novomykhailivka. So now we have at least 2 confirmed geolocations, and as I understand, currently the Russians controls this area. The Russians have control in this area, something like this. So this is, as you can see, significant progress, and the Russians are ready to, of course, to continue offensive operation further to the north and using at least 3 directions along 2 important roads that obviously maybe not so mined as the fields. The Russians can move along the fields because at least this field was demined recently, and of course the Russians can move along the tree lines and these brushes. So the operation of Novomykhailivka has already started, and I expect that maybe even this week we are going to see the first clashes and or the first tanks, Russian tanks that enter Novomykhailivka from the south, because everything is ready, and I think that this village will fall very soon, even much earlier in comparison with Avdiivka. Now we are moving further to Vuhledar direction. And one more time, the Russians destroyed bridge. Don't forget about this. That the situation is perfect for the Russians to continue to complete this battle for the south of Donetsk. And if Novomykhailivka falls, there's going to be completely different story. Konstantinovka, Paraskovivka, everything will fall step by step, one by one. Just one village, one city after another. And this will allow the Russians to encircle Vuhledar, Avdiivka, and there are very high chances that maybe even this year we're going to see all these like battles, all this collapse and so on. When talking about Vremivka tactical bridgehead, we have received almost anything from this area, just the Russian bombardments of the Ukrainian positions inside the village, or at least the bombardments of the ruins that left from the village. And on this video we see another strike over the concentration of Ukrainian forces and a very heavy explosion, and the Russian sources are saying that up to 30 Ukrainian soldiers were wounded or killed as a result of that attack. When talking about Zaporizhia area, we haven't received a lot of updates as well after a previous week of very fierce clashes on the west of Robotyne, when the Ukrainians tried to develop their positions in direction of Kopany and Novoprokopovka. The Ukrainians took operational pause. They tried to, to regroup, to bring some reinforcements, some reserves, to get some fresh forces, and after that they will continue clashes. The Russians reported that as a result of fightings in this area, the Ukrainians lost 140 soldiers, another 11 vehicles, and 2 artillery systems. So for the previous 7 days, the Ukrainians lost around 70 pieces of armored vehicles, so significant losses, and we see that there are no progress on the ground. Very interesting video was published by the Russians. The Ukrainians also know, and they have technology, and they can use distance mining method. On this video we see how the Russians try to destroy the state's anti-tank mine M70, and they were trying to destroy this mine with just rifles and AK-47 or the Russian types of weapon or rifles. And this is the situation. As you can see, it's very difficult to move from one village or city to another because everything in this area is mined with the distance mining method. When talking about Kherson, we stopped receiving any updates about the footholds, Ukrainian footholds, and the main reason of that is that the Russians continue bombardments of the islands, continue bombardments of the Ukrainian concentration of forces, and furthermore, the most important thing, the Russians continue destroying the Ukrainian boats, Ukrainian infrastructure that they can use for supplying and supporting their forces on the Russian bank of the river. But the only important thing that the Russians are saying that as a result of clashes during the previous day, the Ukrainians lost 125 soldiers, 2 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems. So the level of losses is very heavy. And mainly the Ukrainians are losing their soldiers on the Russian bank of the river. The Ukrainians are losing on the shore, on the bank of the river, while they're trying to land their infantry. The Ukrainians are losing their forces on the islands when they're trying to dig in deeper or to move from one position to another. And of course, the Ukrainians are losing their forces below the bridge on the south of Pridniprovsk. And if you remember, when the Ukrainians didn't have the foothold on the Russian side of the river, they had losses around 30-40 soldiers per day. Now they have 125 soldiers per day, so 4 times more. And the reason of that is the presence of the foothold on the Russian side. So now it's a very difficult question for me. Is it has such a big value for the Ukrainians to have this another cemetery or graveyard of Ukrainian soldiers? If you ask my opinion, I don't think that it's worth it. But maybe Zelensky has another opinion. Also, the Russians continue bombardments of Berislav. On this video we can see the usage of 2 FAP 1500, very heavy explosions, and one more time, and this is it. 2 bombs, 2 explosions, very heavy. The Russians continue bombardments of the city, but I don't understand what is the purpose. We don't have the numbers, we don't have geolocations, and the Ukrainians, since the creation of this front line, haven't started even a single offensive operation from direction of Berislav. Now we're moving to the Avdiivka and Bakhmut direction. We got some details. I have updated the map. Currently I show the Russian side of the railways on the east of Avdiivka under Ukrainian control. The Russians tried to make some counter-offensives using the FPV drones, and during the day the Russians were focused just on usage of FPV drones and attacking, bombing the Ukrainian soldiers who were moving along the trenches, along these tree lines, and trying to evacuate or trying to dig in deeper. So the situation is not very good for the Ukrainians. And the Russians started preparation of upcoming counter-offensive operation in direction of Klishchiivka. I don't think that the Russians are planning to recapture or restore control over this village, because there are just ruins in this area, but obviously the Russians want to solve the problem with the railways, because the Ukrainians are digging in deeper along the railways and they're creating a very powerful foothold for further offensive operation in direction of Bakhmut. And to stop the Ukrainians, or not just to stop, but to slow down and to force them to step back, the Russians need to return control over the tree lines and trenches along the railways. And currently they have already launched the artillery preparation, and I expect within the next 48 probably hours another Russian attempt to counterattack with the purpose to restore their positions. We'll see whether the Russians are going to be successful or not. Very interesting updates are coming from Lyman front line, and the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes on Lyman front line, the Ukrainians lost 250 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles including 1 tank, and 2 artillery systems. So the level of losses on Lyman front line probably is the heaviest since the creation of this area, of this front line. Currently I'm trying to change. No, there was like on the 23rd of October we got the level of losses on this front line 480 soldiers, around the battalion. So this is not the heaviest, but anyway very big losses from the Ukrainian side. The clashes continues in the vicinity of Sporne, Bilogorovka, but without any changes on the ground in Tarskoye cell, and there may be very heavy clashes in front of Makeyevka, but we haven't received even a single geolocation of that. Just one video we got from the Russian artillery forces, how they were bombing and attacking the concentration of Ukrainian forces who was trying to counterattack the Russian position positions in this area, but the Ukrainians couldn't complete this because they were discovered and destroyed as a result of very heavy artillery fire. On Kupiansk front line there are no changes and almost nothing interesting to show. Just let's discuss small video that we got from the area between Yagidne and Ivanovka, the area where the Russians tried to attack Ivanovka. This video was published by the Russian forces. On this video, you can see how the Russians were bombing the Ukrainian positions, and in some second, one Ukrainian soldier probably lost his mind and started running away from this position, trying to save his life. So he just gave up, as I understand. And but this video is important because, according to this video, as I understand, the Russians lost control over this tree line, and probably and currently this territory, at least this small like square, is in the gray zone. We will update this map before the next video. And that's it for this video. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel. Put your likes to my Patreon. And have a good day. Bye bye.